Welcome to a new episode of Ask Andrew. I am Andrew Ledet, your guide for today. We're going to be going west on the data frontier. And the purpose of today, we're going to explore one of my favorite metrics, win-loss. And we're going to talk about how to calculate it. Before we start that, there's a couple things to cover. The data you will need is pretty simple. You can get this from Salesforce if you have a different CRM, HubSpot, or if you just have an Excel sheet, that works too. The bare bones elements we're going to need are the number of deals won and the number of total deals. So very often that data is gathered by looking at the status or the closed status of a deal or opportunity. So if you have an opportunity report, you can export that so we can play around with it. You can also do a lot of this in your CRM, but for today, we're going to show the simple way, the math on how to do this in Google Sheets. If you like Excel, you can do that there as well. The formulas are the same. And the pivot tables that we're going to cover are the same too. The calculation's super simple, how we calculate win-loss rate. If we're calculating the won rate, we look at the total number of deals won divided by the total deals possible. And then the purpose of this is really to establish what is the effectiveness of sales. If you have a really low close rate, that's not great. It takes a lot of effort to create deals, to create revenue. If you track this over time, which is one of the bonus components, spoiler, that we're going to look at once we do this simple calculation, to then layer on some other components of how would we look at this by a rep, by a CSM, by a product, by a region, by a deal size. So this is a fun one today. We're going to go through it together. I did a little pre-prep, but we're going to go through it live as I love to do. If you're ready, feel free to follow along, pause the video or podcast, however you're consuming this as we go along. All right, let's have some fun. One thing I found in preparing for this and my love of data is this fun website. It's called makaroo.com, and it allows you to make bogus random data sets. So if you just want to practice your skills with Excel, with Google Sheets, with coding, you can use a site like this to generate a data set if you don't have one to play with. Other fun thing that they have is there's an AI feature. Who doesn't have AI now? You tell it via text what you were looking for, and then it mocks up a bunch of fields. Here are a couple of extra ones that I added into our data set for today. Quick fly through of the data we have. This should look relatively similar to an export from your CRM. You would have an opportunity ID number. This is usually a unique string of letters and numbers, an opportunity name, some sort of dollar amount, the close date of an opportunity, created date of an opportunity. This was a field I created. This is a simple calculation to get the deal velocity, which we'll cover in a future episode, of the time it took from the day it was created to the day it closed. So that's a deal velocity metric that we'll calculate in the future. Here we see stage. Very often that's the name of the status. We see closed won, qualification, prospecting, different standard stages for deals. Lead source, we'll get to that one later. Account name, random names. I do like some of these that are fun. And then the final four fields we have as we finish out looking at the data set is a sales rep, a CSM name, a region, and a product name. These are limited. There may be like 10 to 15 different names, so we can play around with the data. One thing I like to start with whenever I look at data is this step. What data do I have? How is it organized? Before I start playing around with pivot tables or formulas. So now that we've done that, check. The second part would be, what am I trying to find out? That's the second thing I usually ask myself or ask other people when coaching. What are we trying to learn from the data? What question are we trying to answer? The most simple one for today's purpose is, what is the win-loss rate for, let's call it Acme Corp? And then we'll figure that out in a couple different ways. My favorite way will be pivot tables, but for the first pass, let's take a look at how we would calculate that just by eye. It should be relatively simple. One thing I like to do in Google Sheets, you see these little filters on every column. You can access that by hitting this funnel. So you see I'm just selected on one cell and they disappear, they come back. That allows me to filter by any of these columns and all the data then shifts. This is really critical if you're newer to data plays, I like to call it, to not mess up your data sets. Because if I only filtered one column, let's say this column A of opportunity numbers or IDs, and I didn't filter with the other columns, one of them, the opportunity IDs, would then be ascending or descending, but the other columns would have been frozen, and therefore the numbers would no longer be in sync. And that's critical when you're playing with data, is to make sure all of your data stays in line with its friends. Okay, so now we have these filters active. Most simply, what I could do is I could sort by the stage. And for here, one of the things that I think is a little nested fun bit for calculating win-loss rate is I'm only really concerned with two stages. If we see this drop down again, there's a way where we can see here are all the different stages. We have close loss, won, negotiation, proposal, prospecting, qualification. Your organization may have more, they may have less. If I'm calculating the win-loss, I only care about if it was won or if it was lost. So what I can do is simply uncheck all these different ones that are not won or lost. Now we see that that filter, we have loss, we have won, and that's it. So the easiest way I could calculate this would just be a count. On the keyboard, I hit Command, Shift, and down. In the bottom right, hopefully you can see that that's 181 is the count. And then if I want the total number, again, that's 330. So I could off to the side say equals 181 divided by 330 equals 54%. So not bad, not great if you're trying to sell stuff, if you do slightly better than a coin flip in winning deals versus losing deals. So that's the most simple way. How can we calculate win-loss? Now let's do the next layer up. We could use some formulas as well. For this though, for the sake of speed, I'm going to show you one of the things that I love to do that is super versatile to get us at this data. So let's undo this filter. I simply click select all, and all of our data returns. Hopefully, yeah, now we see all the different stages. On a previous episode, I covered how to create a pivot table. We're going to do that again. So we see we have this full set of data, all these different columns. I'm going to click on Insert, Pivot Table. This next prompt says, where do you want me to put this pivot table? So I would like it on a new sheet. I say Create. And here, I remember years ago when I first learned pivot tables, this is one of the most daunting things. I'm like, what do I put where? There are all these boxes. I don't get it. So I'll go over it quickly, and then we'll get at that win-loss calculation. The general concept of pivot tables is allowing you to construct data and play with it in different ways very quickly. Instead of running formulas that only get you one answer, one field, this allows you to get a lot of answers very quickly, sub things in, sub things out, pivot it around, if you will. For now, let's look at how we construct this. We have the option of rows, columns, values, and filters. We're probably going to use all of those to calculate this win-loss. For rows, in columns, it's somewhat interchangeable and somewhat design style of what you prefer based if you have a lot of information as a column or as a row, then that might be guiding you on how you construct this. We also see in Google Sheets, they offer you a couple different options to start, which we can explore later. But for our purposes, let's start with the rows. We know that stages are what we're looking at. We want to know if won versus lost. So here we see close loss, won. It pulled in all of the different options. And then for the most simple way, we want to calculate the values. We're not going to pull in columns just yet. So for values, we want Google Sheets in this pivot table to then count something. We want it to count unique values for each of these stages. So I might use opportunity ID. And here we see like, wow, those numbers are really big. And if you look closely, it says the sum of opportunities because that's a number field. We don't want it to add all of those unique numbers. Instead, we want it to count the unique numbers. And that's the beauty of that opportunity ID. Very often, and it should be a unique number. So when I say count unique, it then gives me the exact number of each of those things that we're counting. So in this case, number of closed won deals, it says 181. Number of closed lost deals, 49. We also see the count for all of these other buckets. And like we did before, we can add a filter. And I'm going to say for stage. And since I love efficiency and counting my clicks, Instead of unchecking 4 things, I'll hit clear. So I saved a click. Yay me. And now we see it's down to the loss and the 1. We see that 330 number that we saw before. And then the 149 lost, the 181 won. A fun thing that you can do with pivot tables is you could do that calculation again of what's 181 divided by 330. Or over here, we see this show as. I can say show percent of column. All of a sudden, I have my loss rate at 45% and my won rate of 54.8%. Simple, pretty quick. Now what allows us, by doing a pivot table, is we can add other components to this. If I wanted to see the win-loss rate by rep, I can pull that in now as a column. So let's do that. Let's go to column, and then we're going to say sales rep. Now we see the win-loss rate for every one of our reps. If I scroll to the right, we see we have 10 or 15 reps. And again, the total is the same, our 54.8% won rate. We see that Timmy doing pretty well, 66% win rate. Let's see who else is our shining example. That might be the top. So now I'm just visually looking across. No. Our friend Ado has 71%. So then as a leader, I might look at this and say, oh, hey, what's Ado doing to get this really high win rate? One thing that's also interesting here is I might look to be more critical of this data. This is just a percent. So if I remove that show percent component, I see that Ado had 10 deals. It's pretty across the board. Almost everyone had the same amount of deals, roughly. And then Timmy had 18. Other ways that you can sort this data, we see sort options here. You can sort it by volume if you wanted. But for the most part, this helps us just pivot information in to see this win-loss rate by sales rep pretty easily. And again, if I wanted to switch back to have as a percentage, I change show as percent of column. So it's calculating this column, what's their win-loss rate. If I wanted to see both the count and the percent, we can do that with a pivot table too. So we would pull in the opportunity ID again. And this time we see that sum component. We did that again, so we want to switch that to count unique. And now we have both the percentage and the number of deals. My preference usually is I like the number first and then the percent after. That's my own preference. And now we see we've done that. How did we solve that? We looked at the data, identified what was in the data set, and very quickly did a quick check to see, hey, how many opportunities are we looking at? And then we created a pivot table to play with the data. Some other things you could do, we could swap out instead of counting by sales rep, we could look at by region. So I click the X to remove those sales reps. And now let's add in the region. Since we set this up before, it keeps those columns set up as we had them. The rows. So we have the win-loss, we have the count, and then we have the percentage. Here we see APAC closes about 64% of their deals, EMEA 52, Latin America 47, and US 58. Pretty cool. And again, that was just a quick click to get that different data. If I wanted to switch for by product, that's one more data set that we have. And these are all just kind of random, fun words that caught my eye within the random data generator. We see the win-loss rate. If I wanted the one rate on top instead of loss, I can do that by changing the ascending versus descending. That's just an alphabetical component. So W comes after L. So by descending, we're getting the end of the alphabet before the beginning of the alphabet. Great. So that is a quick fly through on how we can use pivot tables to calculate the win-loss rate for a data set. If you have any questions, I love playing with data. I love exploring these different concepts. Feel free to reach out to me, askandrewcoaching@gmail.com. Would love to chat and play with data to help you figure out how to make some sense of your data set. Until then, have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye. Special bonus, I almost forgot. I did tease that I would show how to calculate the win-loss rate over time. And I realized I didn't do that. So we have that component to do. This one will be uh, for the rugged data lovers. All right, so we have our pivot table that we just left off, and I'll include in the description and the details for this episode a link to this file if you want to play with it yourself, a way to copy it to your own account so you can tinker around with it too. Okay, so we're trying to now calculate the win-loss rate over time. So before we looked at by product, by sales rep, by region, now we want to use time. So what we will do is instead of the columns being the product, we will change that column to the, let's go with close date. Very often, if you've ever seen this before and shrugged, what does this mean? Hashtag error, everyone's favorite hashtag. That means that there's too much data for Google Sheets to show. It may function better in Excel. I find Excel usually is a little bit more of a workhorse. What I like to do in this situation is a little workaround. So we have that error, which means there's just too many dates because this is 3 years of mock data. What I like to do is then just add a filter to limit down that data set. And instead of all of the products, I just pick one. It doesn't really matter what I do. And now we see that the data displays because it's a finite, smaller data set. Extra trick within Google Sheets is I don't really care by individual date. As a leader, I would care maybe by month or by quarter or by year. In this pivot table, if I right-click on the date, I see this option, Create Pivot Date Group. And we see all of these different options. If I choose month, we now see January, February, April. If I change to quarter, we see Q1, Q2, Q3. One of the things I normally like is adding the year with whatever. So year plus month or year plus quarter. Now we see 2022, Q3, and on and on and on. Now that I have it bucketed down by quarter and year, I can remove that filter. So I no longer need the product. And in this case, I might like to switch around how I have this set up. But for now, I'll just kind of scroll through. So we see Q1 of 22 is when our data set begins, and scroll, 4 quarters a year through Q3 of this current year. Okay, let's say that I want to chart this information. This is a little more complex because we have some different counts that range. So we have a percentage, and then we also have a count of deals. So what I might do just to make it easier is I'll remove one of these. Let's remove the value that is the count. So now we just have percentages. Let's highlight, whoop, with sound effects. We'll click on the 3 dots to get our chart option. Now we see, oops, we'll move it to its own sheet so we can see a little bit better. By quarter, so this is left to right, older to newest. You see that it's kind of varied up and down over time. This type of chart, if you wanted to change it, I have the standard stacking, so everything is out of 1. The max you could possibly have is 100% of the 1 plus loss has to equal 1. If I wanted to add data labels, I can do that. And now we see that the percentage over time has swung relatively, started quite poorly at 33% 1, then surged in Q2. And all of this data would then drive me as a leader to ask questions of what changed, if anything, to drive that huge swing from Q1 to Q2. Did we offer a discount? Did we offer some new product? Did we hire new people? What happened maybe to justify that change? And that would then guide you as a leader to be more disciplined to understand what are the drivers of your business. Similarly, how did we drop 20 percentage points from Q4 to Q1? All questions to ask then using the data, which is objective, to then go a little more subjective of understanding what happened or what didn't happen to drive these changes. Okay, that's the bonus bit on how we can look at a pivot table to look at the win-loss rate over time. I hope you had fun with this bonus content, and thanks for sticking around until the end. Take care. Happy data play. If you would like to learn more or play around with ideas on data, feel free to drop me a note, askandrewcoaching@gmail.com. I'd love to unpack what your data set is and help you make some sense of it. Until then, have a great day. Take care.